All right, so Studio Ghibli Fest starts today. I'm recording this in the middle of the night, and I recently had some tendonitis and carpal tunnel issues that caused me to have to lie in bed for a while, and I thought I would make a little tier list because I watched all of the Studio Ghibli movies during that time. And I'm going to go in chronological order, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the dub versus sub. Spoilers, I vastly prefer subs for almost everything because I like to see how the original characters were intended to sound and act. But I will talk about the dubs because some of them are quite good. And we start in 1984 with Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. This is technically before Studio Ghibli was founded, but it's the movie that led them to found the studio, and it's included on this tier list, and I like it a lot, so I thought I would rate it. And just to be clear here, these are IMDb level ratings, and I'm giving everything at least a 6 because I enjoyed all these movies, so they're all getting a positive rating. So Nausicaa started as a manga that Hayao Miyazaki started writing in 1982. It was originally not planned to be a film or an anime of any sort, but it became popular and he got the opportunity to try to make it into a film, so he did. And the manga was designed to be an epic that was going to stretch a long time. So at the time, he had written 2 complete volumes. I can't remember the number of chapters. And he decided to change everything around and adapt it into a complete story that could be told in one feature film. Nausicaa is the story of a girl who lives in this post-apocalyptic world that has been poisoned by some past mass war. And she lives in an idyllic valley that is protected from the poison, so she's allowed to live a pretty privileged life comparative to what is going on in most of the world. And she has some slightly, potentially supernatural powers. It's not as clear in the movie. She definitely has supernatural powers in the book. And she loves the creatures of the forest, so the forest is this poison wasteland that has consumed most of the world, and humanity lives in just the fringes. She loves the creatures of the forest, and then she is drawn into a war for different circumstances, comparing the book to the manga, but we're reading the movie here. So, the film Nausicaa, I feel, is significantly weaker than the manga Nausicaa, because there's a lot of extraneous characters, and there's some awkward events that happen in the film, particularly the early development parts of the film. The manga is one of my favorite works of all time. It's a massive work reflecting on humanity's relationship with the environment, how to love the environment and be anti-war while still protecting people you love and not falling into despair. And it's an amazing work. It's a sci-fi epic along the lines of Dune, but it's much more character-driven, and I like it a lot. So Nausicaa the film takes a small sliver of that and adapts it into a complete story that can be told in just around 2 hours. And it is quite good. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Like I said, there are some awkward moments. For example, early on in the film, there's a moment where she is able to kill a bunch of people very quickly, and it's not quite clear why that was possible, because she's a young girl and she just has a stick. It feels quite out of place. There's a similar-ish event in the manga, but it's a lot better explained, and it makes more sense in the context of the manga. There's also characters like Kuratawa, who feel a bit extraneous in the film, whereas in the manga, they have a lot different purpose over the course of the story. And I also feel like the story in the manga just feels much more purposeful, and it makes a lot more sense, and it's so well done. Now, that is not to say that the movie does not outpace the manga in certain areas. The entire ending sequence of this movie is fantastic. The voice actress who plays Nausicaa in the Japanese original dub, is amazing. And there's a sequence at the end involving a scream of pain and despair that is just one of the most chilling screams I've ever heard in film. And I love the end of this movie. And so despite its flaws, I love the whole Nausicaa story, both the movie and the film, enough that I will give this an 8 out of 10. Speaking of the dub, the English dub, I'm talking about the new one that was done, not the Warriors of the Wind, with Patrick Stewart as Master Yupa. And Patrick Stewart does an amazing job. The Nausicaa voice actress is also very good, although her scream in that moment I'm talking about isn't quite as powerful. My issue mainly with the dub is some of the background voices for the children, etc., make it feel a little bit more of a kiddie film than the original Japanese voices did. They managed to keep a fairly serious tone throughout in the Japanese, I feel. And I just prefer the Japanese for this, even though Patrick Stewart is amazing, and I would say maybe a slight improvement over the original Yupa. All right. In 1986, I believe, we have Castle in the Sky, which is the first official Ghibli movie. It was written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki, and I think I like this movie a little bit more than Nausicaa. Nausicaa is an amazing character. I like her a little bit more than the two main characters of Castle in the Sky, but Castle in the Sky works better, I think, as an entire story. So Castle in the Sky is the story of a young girl who's descended from a family that, in the past, had control, had some connection or power that connected them to this giant flying castle, which is a piece of old world technology that used to rule the world. Slightly spoilery there, I'm sorry, but it doesn't really matter. Now, this is very similar themes to Nausicaa, although it is a little less dark. It's closer to a kid's movie than Nausicaa was. And, as I said, it was a story originally intended to be told in a movie format, and so it works slightly more cohesively as a full, complete story than Nausicaa did. My only issues with this film are the pirates. I feel like their tone is a little too goofy at times, although they become much better characters later on in the film. The story of the two main characters, I believe, works really well, and I love seeing their journey from start to end. I believe it has a good ending. I believe all parts of this movie are very strong. This is one of the few movies that I think the English dub does a pretty darn good job. I like both versions of this movie, although, as always, I think I still prefer the Japanese, just because that's how the characters were originally intended to sound and act. All right. Now, third, in 1988, we have 1988, we have My Neighbor Totoro. In my Ghibli marathon, I left this to one of the last movies that I saw. Not because I was saving the best for last, but because I had no interest in it at all. It looks, from the summary and the cover, like a children's movie, just a bunch of cuteness, and the story didn't sound that interesting to me, and so I put it off. And having watched through the rest of their movies, I probably should have known that this is not what it appears to be. This is something very, very special. So this tells the story of a family, two girls, 12 and I believe 4, yeah, and their father, who are moving to a new place out in the country. It's a little bit run down, and they're moving there because their mother is in the hospital with an unspecified illness, and they're not sure how well she's doing. They need to be closer to her because she's not probably going to get out of the hospital for a while. And it's just a brilliant movie where the fantasy and cutesy elements reinforce the theme that it's a family trying to stay positive through a difficult time in their lives. And I love this movie from start to finish. It's very short, and it makes the best use of its runtime. It's just an amazing movie. It's simultaneously one of the happiest movies I've ever seen, and I was crying throughout the second half because the emotional moments hit very, very well. Just, if you haven't seen this movie, it's the Studio Ghibli logo for a reason, and it's brilliant. Brilliant movie. So our first non-Miyazaki movie here. Isao Takahata, also one of the founding members of Studio Ghibli, made this film, Grave of the Fireflies, to release in a double feature with My Neighbor Totoro. Somewhat of a baffling decision, considering that this is a bleak war movie, and My Neighbor Totoro is a children's movie. Children's movie, not in a derogatory sense. My Neighbor Totoro is one of my favorite films of all time. And Grave of the Fireflies, I'm going to put it as an 8 out of 10. And I like it less than Castle in the Sky and Nausicaa, but it might be somewhat greater than them in terms of the overall filmmaking. It's just such a bleak story that it's hard to revisit, and it also doesn't have the really connecting characters. I connect with the characters, but it doesn't fully pull me in like, for example, another similar anti-war World War II film is in this corner of the world, not a Studio Ghibli movie, but I like that movie slightly more than this, just because I get so attached to the characters, and even though that movie is quite dark as well, it has more hope in it that leads to a little bit more rewatchability. So Grave of the Fireflies tells the story of two children trying to survive after a firebombing in Japan. I forget which city. I should remember. It's been a little bit since I've seen this one. And their parents die in the firebombing, and it's their tale. And it's based loosely on true events. It's based on a short story by someone who lived through similar events in his life. So it's a fictional account by someone who was there during this time in Japan. And it's a very, very powerful film. It's a very dark film, so be prepared. And it might be my favorite Takahata film. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say. It's very good animation. Takahata's style is always very different from Hayao Miyazaki, and it's also a film that has no fantasy elements. It's a film you could recommend to a more serious film buff who might not be as interested in animation, and they could get something out of this without having to dive into a fantasy anime, even though the movies I've talked about previously are definitely worth a lot of merit. So 1989, I believe, shortly after, we have Kiki's Delivery Service. I loved the character design in this movie, even though it seemed like a children's movie. I watched it very early on, unlike My Neighbor Totoro, and it was the happiest movie watching experience of my life. This is an easy 10 out of 10. Kiki's Delivery Service is based on a Japanese children's book of the same name, and it tells the story of a young girl named Kiki who wants to follow in the witch's tradition of her mother despite her parents' slight reservations. This means that at the age 13, she has to find a new place to live that doesn't have a witch and train in a skill and find a way to live for 1 year before returning home. So she flies off and tries to find a place to live. And it's just a wonderful little story about feeling lonely and out of place, trying to meet new people and make new friends and find your way in the world. It's about burnout. It's about love. It's just a happy movie, a wonderful story, endlessly rewatchable, and I want to move to the town that she moves to. Just a wonderful story. Now, another odd one. Here we have Porco Rosso in 1992. Actually, I have these wrong. Only Yesterday's first. So in 1991, Only Yesterday. This is another Isao Takahata film. And I'm going to give this one a 7. So this tells the story of a woman who's 28 years old and working in an office job in Tokyo and decides to take a vacation to go work in the fields. And on her way out to work in the fields, and during her time in the fields, she is remembering her time as a young girl and reflects on the choices she made and what she's doing with her life. And this sounds like a movie that I would really, really connect with. In practice, I did not love this movie. I really connected with the part of the movie dealing with her past. I thought the animation style used in the past was amazing. It's some pastel colors, it has blurred lines, it looks like a watercolor drawing, which a lot of Takahata's work from here on tries to emulate this style. And it's a beautifully animated film, and similar to Grave of the Fireflies, there's no fantasy aspects at all. It's entirely grounded and more mature. But I wasn't as invested in the present day timeline story, and I did not love the ending as well. I felt the build up to the decision she makes and how that worked was just didn't give me a powerful feeling in the end. But it's still a nice movie, and a lot of people really connect with this, so I'm sure it's worth checking out, and maybe you'll connect with it more than I did. But yes, great movie. So Porco Rosso. This, kind of like My Neighbor Totoro, turned me off a bit just by the cover, a pig in a fighter plane, and the title Porco Rosso. It sounds a little silly. It sounds weird. I wasn't sure what it was going to be about or what the tone would be, but this movie is awesome. I think I'm going to put it slightly below these two. This movie is amazing. It is the story of a fighter pilot who left the army and is living as a bounty hunter in the Adriatic Sea near Italy. And it's about it starts as a fun adventure movie, and it gets into some heavier themes later on. And I don't really know what to say about it other than that it's a wonderful little movie. It's less of a kid's movie than, for example, Kiki and My Neighbor Totoro, but it's not super dark, so a kid could probably watch it and enjoy it. It has some violence, and yeah, it's just a great movie. I didn't connect with it as much as these two, but it's such a tight story. It's beautifully animated. I love the designs of all the different planes, and I love the two main characters, Porco and Fio, who is a young plane designer in Italy, who helps him rebuild his plane after some events and becomes the main part of the story. Wonderful movie. It's not Miyazaki's very best in my opinion, but it's still up there with the good ones. All right, our first movie not directed by Takahata or Hayao Miyazaki, we have Ocean Waves. So Ocean Waves was directed by Tomomi Mochizuki, and it came out in 1993. And this was the last Ghibli movie I watched, and I went into it knowing that it had a slightly poor reputation. And during the first half hour, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to finish it, because it is a story about teenagers being kind of horrible to each other. It's a story about a boy who's, over the summer, becomes infatuated with a girl that his best friend is in love with, who moves to the small town they're living in from Tokyo. And it's about their relationships and the events that go on during high school, and it's mostly a bunch of teen drama. But in the second half of the movie, or the last third, I would say, maybe it took only a quarter, I'm not sure, really won me over, and it makes the ideas it was going for clear. I still don't think it fully redeems that first half hour, which I didn't like at all, but it's a decent movie. I'm going to give it a 6. I don't like it as much as the other movies we've talked about so far, but I think it's at least worth watching. I got something out of this movie despite its bad reputation. And I like the message about the connection you have to the people you grew up with, and reflecting on your past relationships, and just feeling nostalgia and feeling letting old quarrels go and feeling warmth towards the people that you went to school with in later times. I liked it a lot. Pom Poko. Isao Takahata again comes back with a weird one. This is in 1994, and it's a story of tanuki, or these raccoon dogs, that have magical powers, and their land is getting taken away as a suburb expansion is being made in Japan. I believe this is outside Tokyo, but I'm not entirely sure. I forget. But I like this a lot more than I expected to. This is another one I left towards the end. I believe I watched it right before Ocean Waves. And I really, really like this movie. I think I'm going to give it a 7 still. I liked it slightly more than Only Yesterday, I think. It's a very strange story. There's a lot of cool... It's a wild animation. It's very creative. It's probably the most Studio Ghibli Takahata film in that it has some wild, creative animation things going on, closer to like Spirited Away than most of Takahata's other stuff, which is fairly grounded. If not, Takahata stuff is always creative visually, but it's not always like the creative worlds that Miyazaki creates in things like Spirited Away or Castle in the Sky, etc. And this is the most fantasy creative that Takahata gets in his filmography, in my opinion. And it's a pretty good movie. It has some weird stuff, like there's a decent amount of violence and death, and there's shape-shifting testicles and whacking people with it, so it's not quite a kid's movie. It's a strange one, but I liked it a lot, and I would watch this again, and maybe my rating could even go up, because I like this movie. It's funny, it's got adventure. Yeah, just an interesting one. I don't generally connect with Takahata's films as much as Miyazaki, but this one had something about it. It's interesting. So now another new director. In 1995, we have Whisper of the Heart, directed by Yoshifumi Kondo. And this was one of the movies that got me back into watching Studio Ghibli. When I was younger, I believe I watched Ponyo and Howl's Moving Castle. And then I saw the clip on Vimeo of the two main characters playing violin and singing Country Roads in Japanese. And it hooked me, and I had to watch this movie. And that a few years ago got me back interested in Studio Ghibli, and then recently I watched all their movies. Needless to say, this movie is very, very good. It's the story of a young girl, very creative, who likes reading and writing, and is struggling to figure out what she wants to do with her life. And her meeting a boy who is very dead set on becoming a violin maker, and how this relationship changes her life and changes the way she thinks about what she wants to do. And it's just a brilliant little movie. I don't fully connect with it as much as the top two, just because it's not quite as tight in my opinion. The ending, well, not bad, it's not. It just kind of ends, which is great, but it's not the tight masterpieces that I think these two tens are, in my opinion. But I love this movie a lot, and I connect with the characters. I would watch it again in a heartbeat. And yeah, I highly recommend this film if you have not seen it. What I will say about the English dub of this one is that while it's good, a central theme of this, or a plot point of this movie, is translating the lyrics to Country Roads into Japanese. And it doesn't quite work if you are already speaking English, so that kind of bothered me. But otherwise, the English voice acting is good, but I would still, again, for all of these, recommend Japanese. Princess Mononoke. Of all of Hayao Miyazaki's fantasy epics, I believe that this is the most refined, and it is his best. And so I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. Can't really explain myself why it's not a 10, but I didn't connect with it as much as the top two or the other movies on IMDb that I have rated as a 10, but it's an amazing movie. It takes the themes that he developed over the course of the Nausicaa manga and his other works, and it really refines them into this perfect fantasy mythological story about environmentalism, not condemning either side, which is kind of the theme of the Nausicaa manga towards the end, but showing that humanity and nature just have to learn to live with one another. It has amazing characters. I love Ashitaka as the main character. For once, the moral, strong, grounded character is a male in a Miyazaki movie, and San, or Princess Mononoke, as she is titularly known here, is more of a hot-headed, violent, revenge-seeking character, in contrast to Nausicaa, who is very grounded and pacifist. And I love all the characters. I love the story. The animation is top tier, and it's slightly different style than other Miyazaki films. If you've ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of similarities between the character design, the design of the spirits, the themes, the design of the world, and the structures. Just everything is very, very similar. I'm sure that Avatar: The Last Airbender drew a lot of inspiration from Princess Mononoke. And rightfully so. It's one of the best fantasy animated movies out there. And this one, okay, we're going to talk about dubs for a second. Because people love to say that this dub was written by Neil Gaiman, and it's amazing. This dub is not good, in my opinion. I cannot stand this dub. I don't know if it's just the performances or also the translation, because the translation changes a decent amount too. But mainly the performances do not hold a candle to the Japanese. If you watch this movie, please watch it in Japanese. I know some people love the dub. I am not one of them. Watch it in Japanese. It's way better. Okay, My Neighbors the Yamadas. Another Takahata joint here, and this is closer to a TV series almost than a film, in that it's a bunch of little vignettes adapting a comic book series, and it has Takahata's signature watercolor trying to imitate a manga or a comic style that is somewhat similar to the past scenes in Only Yesterday, but it's more comicified here because it's adapting a manga. And I like this movie. I think I'm going to give it a 6 just because I didn't like all of it. So I found the first couple of vignettes not as good. So the first 10 to 15 minutes didn't grab me. And then the last 20 or 30 minutes I was not as into either. But the middle of the movie I really, really loved. And I thought it was funny. I liked the characters. But it's just a little serious. It's not anything super life-changing or outstanding compared to the other works that are in the Ghibli catalog. Now, another complaint I have is that the daughter character is very funny and cute, and she only had one vignette dedicated to her. I'm sure there's more comic strips that she's in, but he only adapted one that she was the main focus of, and I would have loved for her to be in the movie more. But yes, I like this movie, probably a little bit more than Ocean Waves, but not as much as the rest. Now, the big one. Spirited Away. According to most people, the best Ghibli movie, maybe the best animated movie of all time. I do not quite share those opinions, and I'm going to put Spirited Away here. I give it an 8 out of 10, and I like these more, despite, perhaps, Spirited Away have some better objective qualities than, say, Nausicaa, but I just love Nausicaa, so. Spirited Away. Perhaps their best animated movie in terms of animation, up there with Mononoke and Howl's Moving Castle and Wind Rises and Tale of Princess Kaguya, which I'll talk about later, of course, but quite also Hayao Miyazaki's most creative world. Every single character in this movie is a different creature design with a different backstory and connection to the world, and they're all very cool to look at. Everything flows together nicely. It's just an amazing little world that he's made. Chihiro is an okay main character. I don't love her as much as the main characters for all the movies I've rated above, but she's passable. My main problem with this movie, I'm not going to sing its praises, obviously. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10, which is a very high rating. I'm just going to talk about my criticisms because so many people already are aware of how amazing this movie is. My criticisms come with Miyazaki's movies from this point forward start to have a problem for me where the connections between the characters aren't as developed as I feel they need to be. For example, towards the end of this film, I'm going to do slight spoilers here. It's implied and even fully stated in the film, not just implied, that Chihiro is in love with another character, but I didn't feel like that was developed enough throughout the movie. There's also a reveal as to the origins of that character. I didn't feel like that had the impact that they desired because it wasn't as developed as it needed to be. Also, the various fantasy characters, creatures, and witches and such, because they're so strange, you don't really understand their motivations all the time, which makes it a bit difficult to understand why they make the decisions they make. So it just didn't flow quite together. I didn't get why everything was happening, and I've seen this movie twice now. And yeah, I just don't feel like the plot is quite as tight as I would like a movie's plot to be. But again, very enjoyable movie. Both the dub and the sub are quite good, and I think you can't go wrong either way. This is one of the ones where I think both are equally acceptable. You can watch the dub if you feel like watching the dub. I still prefer Japanese just because that's the original intention, but the dub is good. Now we come to The Cat Returns, which is the only Ghibli movie that is a sequel or spin-off from another. Hayao Hayao Miyazaki tends to not like sequels. And this one is directed by Hiroyuki Morita. And it is a very short movie. It's an hour and 15 minutes. And it is a spin-off of Whisper of the Heart, with the Baron and Muta / Moon being cats and dolls, a doll and a cat, respectively, that appear in Whisper of the Heart. They don't talk in Whisper of the Heart, so their characters are very different in The Cat Returns, but that's the connection to The Cat Returns. This movie is about a girl who saves a cat. The cat turns out to be cat royalty in this fantastical cat underworld that is hidden in the city, and this causes her a bunch of problems because the king then starts paying attention. The king of the cat world starts paying attention to her and wants her to marry his son. So it's a very fun little movie. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I think I'm going to put it at the top of 7 here. It's the funniest Ghibli movie in my opinion. There was one part that shocked me. I will say it involves someone being thrown off a building, and I laughed out loud because it was so ridiculous and surprising. And yeah, I just smiled the whole way through this movie. It's nothing spectacular in terms of related to the movies above it, which are somewhat, in some sense, spectacular achievements, but the animation is very good. It's a little bit different style. The tone is very different. It feels almost like a Western animation, or closer to maybe some modern anime, but more close to Western animation because it doesn't have the modern animeisms, really. But it's really good. Would recommend for if you have an hour or an hour and a little bit to watch a funny movie, especially if you like Whisper of the Heart. But really, you don't need to watch Whisper of the Heart to watch The Cat Returns. There's hardly any connection at all. Now, another crowd favorite, Howl's Moving Castle, which I had watched when I was much younger and remember not liking very much. And I watched it again, and I liked it more than I remember. But I still have problems with it. I'm going to give it a 7. What I like about it is the animation is amazing. The world is really, really cool. It's another world. It's probably my second or third favorite Miyazaki world after Nausicaa and Castle in the Sky. I'm not counting the real world ones. If we're talking about creative worlds, this is my third favorite, probably after these two. It's just a wonderful world where steampunk and magic is flowing around, and the beginning of the story is amazing. A girl meets a wizard, runs into a witch, who, in revenge, turns her into an old woman, and so she has to go off and search for a way to turn herself back young. Quite a great premise to suck you into the story, and the plot starts rolling along. My issues come with the fact that this plot falls apart in the last third of the movie. It just doesn't make sense, and they throw you have an already convoluted plot that's not quite making sense, and then you throw time travel in. It didn't need to be there. And then the movie wraps up neatly in a way that doesn't make sense at all, and I just cannot stand the way the plot of this movie goes towards the end. Also, I don't feel Howl's development quite worked for me in the later parts of this movie. But I will say, Sophie is an amazing main character. Calcifer is an amazing character as well. So is the young wizard. I forget his name, unfortunately. But in the Howl's Apprentice and the Scarecrow, every character in this movie is iconic and brilliant, and I can see why so many people love this movie. I just can't go over how silly and nonsensical the plot becomes. But if you can get over that and you're not as much of a stickler for characters' motivations and decisions making sense that I am, this is a special movie, and I can see why so many people love it. I just can't get past those things. And this is just something that Miyazaki starts doing in his later fantasy movies, as we'll see with Ponyo. So, Tales from Earthsea. Widely regarded as Studio Ghibli's worst film. And I have to disagree. I like this movie. This is directed by Goro Miyazaki, and it was released in 2006. I will say Howl's Moving Castle was 2004, and The Cat Returns was 2002. I forgot to note those. Spirited Away was 2001. And I think I like Tales from Mercy by a little less than Pom Poko. I will admit that there are parts of this movie that are fairly rushed. However, a lot of people complain about the characters in this world feeling unlikable and kind of despisable, despicable. I disagree. I like the characters. I like the main character. I like how he is cold and somewhat mysterious, and you don't quite understand his motivation. Becomes a bit clearer as the movie goes on. And I love the city that is shown throughout the middle of this movie. It's just an amazing fantasy city. It's very dark. There's slavery. There's a lot of horrible things going on, which is very different than the other Ghibli movies. And it just feels like this rich fantasy world that you're stepping into, which is, I just have a bias towards, I guess, generic fantasy done well, and this is just so good. And yeah, I like the Earthsea world too. I remember enjoying the Earthsea books when I was younger. I don't remember them at all, so I can't compare their plots to the plot of this movie. But yeah, I like the characters. I love the world and the animation. It's, again, Studio Ghibli is on a tear of good animation in these years. Honestly, throughout their whole career, but these years specifically. And while the end isn't great, I don't think it ruins the movie. For some reason, the end didn't bother me quite as much as Howl's Moving Castle, despite it also not making that much sense. But Howl's Moving Castle has better characters, and I don't know. I like this movie. I'm a Goro Miyazaki fan, despite people hating on his stuff a lot. Would recommend. Only watched in Japanese, so I can't comment on the dub. Ponyo, released in 2008, again directed by Hayao Miyazaki, and brilliantly animated. It is a Little Mermaid-inspired story, quite different. I don't know that much of the original story anymore. I mean, the original fairy tale, not the Disney movie. It's very different from the Disney movie, but it's beautifully animated. The characters are great early on. I just don't quite connect with how the plot develops in this movie. It becomes this weird love test between two very young characters. And again, while in, for example, Castle in the Sky, even Porco Rosso, Whisper of the Heart, Kiki's Delivery Service even, you can understand why the characters that they're portraying to be in love actually love each other and why they have this connection. In Ponyo, it just didn't feel it. They're too young. They didn't spend enough time together. I don't understand what this whole love test deal is. And again, the plot is, it doesn't feel like the plot flows from the characters as much. It's just more of a mythological tale the characters don't quite fit with, in my opinion. But still a good movie. Enjoyable watch. If you want to watch another Little Mermaid-inspired tale that is very different, but I like more, I would recommend Lou Over the Wall by Masaki Yuasa. It's a movie that no one has seen. I think it has around 2,000 reviews or 2,000 ratings on IMDb, which is very low. But check that film out if you get a chance. Ponyo. The Secret World of Ariete. This is the first film directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi. And I was excited because I had previously watched when Marnie was there and liked it. And so I went into this movie with high hopes. But I'm going to give this movie a 6. This is based on the book series The Borrowers. So it's about little people who live in a house and borrow / technically steal, but they call it borrowing, small items from the house to survive. And Ariete, the titular character, is quite a great main character. I loved watching her move throughout this meticulously crafted, small world, tiny little people world that's built within this house, and the animation's just brilliant. It's so good. My issue comes with the plot of the movie is driven by, if they just developed The plot of the movie is she becomes connected with this boy who comes to stay at the house, and then an older woman who owns the house tries to find and capture the little people. There's hardly any motivation given to this villain who tries to find and capture them, and that plot just didn't really work at all for me. And again, it takes time away from the development of the relationship between Ariete and the boy, which doesn't get nearly enough development for me to feel the connection that they wanted me to feel, I believe. So overall, I just didn't connect with any of the characters except for Ariete herself. It felt like too much was put into this movie, and it didn't really work for me. Again, the animation is amazing. I love this little world, and I didn't mind the end. The end wrapped things up nicely, I thought. And overall, not a bad movie, but not even close to Ghibli's best. Another Goro Miyazaki one next. This is From Up on Poppy Hill, and this was released in 2011. Ariete was 2010. I forgot to mention that. From Up on Poppy Hill tells the story of a girl going to school in Japan after the Korean War. I forget exactly what time period, but it's around when Japan's going to be hosting the Olympics, and they're transitioning into a more modern Japan. And it's about students trying to save an old clubhouse. It's about these young people remembering their family that they lost in the wars, in the Korean War, I believe it's specifically this time. And it's just a nice little tale. I love the characters. I really got why they were connected to one another. I loved the clubhouse. I understood why they were trying to protect it. And yeah, I connected to this movie a lot. There is a plot point, which is just a strange Japanese trope, which is that at one point, it's spoiled in the trailer, so I'll spoil it here too. The two main characters believe that they're related, that they're brother and sister. Which, it's a trope in Japan, and it's weird, and some people are really bothered by it. It didn't bother me that much. The reason I don't like it is that it becomes a non-issue later in the movie, so why even include it at all? It's just weird, and I believe it's a relic because this is based on an original drama, I believe a novel or something. It's based on some source material, and they probably just kept it from that, and it doesn't ruin the movie for me. It doesn't really add anything to the movie, that plot point. And overall, I love the characters, love the story. The animation, again, is once amazing. Just the animation of this amazing old clubhouse that the children hang out in is really, really cool. And I connected with this movie a lot. I think I'm a Goro Miyazaki fan. Obviously not as much as their best, but good movie. Alright, The Wind Rises. 2013, Hayao Miyazaki's supposedly last film, but he's coming out with another one this year. And this is maybe the most interesting in terms of structure compared to the other movies, because there's a lot of dream sequences, there's a lot of stuff going on. I feel like I could watch this again and get different things out of it. But I don't quite connect with the characters as much as the others. So I'm going to put it here. I think I'm going to put it just below Grave of the Fireflies. This is the story. It's based on the true story of, I forget his full name. Jiro is the main character, but I forget the full name of the real person he's based on. Who is a nearsighted boy who loves planes, who decides to become an airplane designer and designs one of the most famous Japanese fighter planes in the World War II era. And it's a movie about dedicating your life to craft, the sacrifices you have to make. It's about creating technology even for the love of it, even though it's going to be used to kill people. And it's a very cool movie. It's amazingly animated. Again, just so much going on in these animated scenes. So many different moving pieces. And another thing I appreciate about this movie is even in the Japanese dub, when they go to Germany or there's a German character on screen, they speak German and it feels well voice acted, unlike some anime I know where they'll have a character that's supposed to be American and it's just a Japanese voice actor doing the worst English you've ever heard. But it is, it's just all around production quality, voice acting, it's top tier Ghibli. My qualms with it come with the main character, because he's such a cold and dedicated person. It's slightly hard to connect with him on a first watch, which it works because that's what it's trying to get across, and I did feel emotional at the end of the movie. My issue comes with some of the side characters. For example, the woman he marries. I feel like she was really left out to dry, and her characterization was so minimal, and her story is so sad that I felt she deserved some characterization, and it just wasn't there. So that's my main complaint. Otherwise, it's a great movie. I just wish there was more to that side story, and I'll probably have to rewatch this movie. Maybe I'll get more of it on a rewatch. But it's very good. It doesn't connect with me as much as their more classic hits that I have rated really highly, just because I rewatch them all the time, and I want to I just connect with those movies more. But it's up there. It's very, very cool. Now, The Tale of Princess Kaguya, in my opinion, the single best visual achievement in Ghibli's history. Despite all of their movies being brilliantly animated, this is the coolest looking one, in my opinion. Just amazing watercolors and charcoal. It's I'm not sure if it's actually done that way, probably not, now that I think about it, but it imitates charcoal drawings, and it's so cool the way it looks. This is Isao Takahata in, again, 2013, trying to revisit the classic Japanese legend of Princess Kaguya, but trying to explore the feelings and emotions of the princess herself and why she makes the decisions she does. And I believe it partially succeeds. I understood the way Princess Kaguya was feeling throughout this movie, but that does not fully explain the events that take place and the actions of the other characters. So it feels like it's exploring the emotions of one character while still living in this mythological world where I don't fully connect with everything that's going on. So even though this movie is beautiful, and I like the main character and I connect with it, and it is quite a sad story, I'm going to give this a 7. Maybe I'll put it slightly below Poppy Hill, although that feels somewhat blasphemy because this was such a meticulous work of art. But yeah, I just don't fully connect with the whole story, although I do connect with he succeeded in getting me to connect with the feelings and emotions of Kaguya herself. I don't fully connect with the story as a whole. Especially the end is a little strange, but I won't spoil it. Check it out because it is beautiful to look at. And finally, not their final film, but the final film I wanted to talk about in this list is When Marnie Was There. This is also directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi, who directed Secret World of Ariadne, and it is based on a British novel by Joan Robinson of the same title. I know that most people put this movie around the mid-low tier. Some people rate it highly, but this is one of my favorite movies of all time. And when I watched it the first time, I think I would have put it at an 8. I've watched it twice more since then, and I've read the novel that it's based on. And I really, really connect with this movie. It's one of the most unique animated movies I've ever seen, and I love it to bits. I believe I will put them like this. So When Marnie Was There tells the story of a young girl with asthma who is very lonely and has issues connecting with people. She has at least a mild form of depression, it seems, in the movie. She's not hopeless or suicidal or anything, but she's kind of listless. She's drifting in life and doesn't know what she's doing, and her foster parents send her off to the countryside to live with some of their relatives because she's had asthma attacks due to stress and anxiety, and they just think she needs a break. The doctor says she needs to get out, and so they send her off there. And while in this place, the relatives she's with are very lovely, but she becomes obsessed with this magnificent mansion across the marsh from where they live, and she begins to connect and find that there is a girl living there who she befriends, and it starts this magical journey of just finding a friend when you believe no one can connect with you. And that's what this movie is about. It's about family, it's about past trauma, it's about loneliness, and it's about connecting with, finding a person to connect with despite finding the world so adverse to you and finding it difficult to connect with people, and then finding that one person to connect to. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. I will mention that the book is equally as good, and I believe that When Marnie Was There is one of the best novel adaptations I've ever seen. It does make changes from the novel, but they're all to keep the story flowing within a reasonable time period. Because the novel has an entire second part where there's several more characters introduced, and what the book does is it condenses these extra characters into a single character in the movie, and it introduces that character earlier on. I think it works wonderfully. If you've watched the movie and liked it, I would highly recommend reading the novel, and vice versa. If you've ever read the novel, this movie is one of the best adaptations of a novel ever, in my opinion. So there is my list. I believe this is how I will let it stand, and go out and watch some Ghibli movies. They're all on HBO Max, or you can buy the Blu-rays on Amazon for pretty cheap these days, or they will be in theaters for Ghibli Fest. At least the Hayao Miyazaki ones will be. I love these movies, and I would recommend every single one of them